Die Welt da draußen wartet nicht auf uns.
Germany now, and the Conservatives are celebrating winning the country's election. The results also saw large gains for the far right.
Are we facing a 1930s moment?
I belong to the most happiest generation of Germans in the history of Germany. And we have to make sure that we continue that for our children and grandchildren.
You're giving me the impression that the AFD are not that concerned about it.
The biggest risk right now is from the democratic establishment that they can find solutions to the pretty difficult problems they're confronted with.
Remigration.
It's okay to be proud to be German. This is a very important principle.
There's no room for firewalls. Democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters.
They want to dismantle the European project that has brought us decades of peace, freedom and prosperity.
Nie wieder ist jeden Tag.
Hello and welcome to a special bonus edition of Control-Alt-Deceit, a new podcast designed to try and figure out who on earth is in control these days, which alternative reality are they pushing, and also what the cost will be of this type of deception to our much valued Western-style democracy. I'm Nina Dos Santos, former CNN anchor and international broadcaster.
And I'm Owen Bennett-Jones, a BBC radio regular and author.
On this week's show, we're digesting the aftermath of Germany's election and considering what a new government led by Friedrich Merz would really mean for Germany and for Europe as a whole in what is fast becoming an emerging new world order.
As the far right captures 1 in 5 votes in Germany, we'll be asking a German newspaper owner in the city where Hitler rose to power, is Germany facing another 1930s moment?
And with a more assertive Germany back in the driving seat in Brussels, the longest-serving member of the European Parliament of the Christian Democratic Union will be joining us to assess how other member states will take it if they end up getting big-footed by Berlin. All of that and more to come here on Control-Alt-Deceit. But first.
We
have won this 2025 election.
Gewonnen.
The man who is now set to become the most powerful person in Europe's most powerful country gave an extraordinary set of remarks immediately after his victory. Rather than dialing down the rhetoric, he dialed it up, saying that Europe had now to become independent of the United States as soon as possible.
My absolute priority is to strengthen Europe as soon as possible, in such a way that step by step we can really achieve independence from the USA.
Merz has wasted no time in outlining the strategic priorities that he thinks Germany and Europe as a whole should be looking at straight away. And refreshingly enough for a politician, he's come up with some novel solutions. One of them is to shore up Europe's security as soon as possible by means of creating some kind of nuclear umbrella using UK nuclear weapons as well as French nuclear weapons. Brexit notwithstanding, Britain has its way back into Europe from the cold, especially with regards to defence. This is because Europe is concerned that the war in Ukraine will not end there. And also because J.D. Vance decided to deliver a firebrand speech to German politicians at the Munich Security Conference, more or less saying that America was no longer the reliable security and trading ally that it has been for many a decade in this part of the world.
The crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. Our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent.
Now, speaking of which, the trading relationship between the EU and the United States is also going to come under some serious pressure under a Merz chancellorship. This is because not only is the German economy ill-equipped to deal with this problem, it's in a third year of recession, but Donald Trump has promised to implement double-digit tariffs on EU goods heading across the Atlantic to America, and they have hinted that they would like to retaliate with tariffs on big technology services, and that would really irk Silicon Valley. So, Owen, what do you make of Friedrich Merz? Is he the right man for this difficult moment?
Well, I mean, I think it was an incredibly impressive start. And he has made this very strong statement. He's made his intentions very clear. Both internally, he's not going to do a deal with the far right, and externally, he's going to press for more European power. Now, you raised some of the issues there. I think that, the biggest issue for Europe now, faced with the need for much more defence spending, is just the terrible state of the economy. And I've got some numbers that just illustrate how dire the situation is. 15 years ago, the European economy was 10% larger than the United States economy. Now it's 23% smaller. I mean, it's an extraordinary switch around in the last 15 years. It reflects the fact that there has been so little economic growth in Europe compared to the United States over this period. Now, if you look at GDP per head, $62,000 in Europe, $86,000 in the US. China, obviously, way behind, $26,000. And then on the debt, you could say, okay, fine, the Americans are just, it's a sugar rush that's been going on for decades. They finance this with massive deficits. Fine. But, Europe also has a significant deficit, 90% of GDP. So there's not, there is room for Germany to spend more. There's not an awful lot of room for Europe as a whole to spend more. And yet they've got these massive challenges. So, without sorting out the economy, I don't know where it goes. He seems to know what he wants to do in terms of the politics and challenging America. Can he do it?
Owen, I'm conscious I'm going to say something that might sound smug here, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it because I have covered a lot of EU summits during my time. And one thing I would say is that, yes, there will be some EU countries that will be quite happy to see a return of German leadership at difficult times like these, but there'll also be others who had to suffer some really tough economic medicine during the Eurozone bailouts who won't necessarily want to be dictated to by Berlin. And there's also members like Slovakia and Hungary in Eastern Europe that have quite close ties to the Kremlin and could also prove to be a spanner in the works of this project of European unity. So I suppose the question is, will everybody hold the line? Will they finally come together and work as one, as Merz has urged them to do across Europe? Who better to ask than one of the longest standing Christian Democrats in Brussels? Elmar Brok was a CDU MEP from, get this, 1980 all the way to 2019. So that means during the period of the fall of the Berlin Wall, German reunification, the migrant crisis. Brok, it seems, has known Friedrich Merz personally for quite some time. So, first question, what's he like?
I think Friedrich Merz will go back to the classical European policy as it was done by Chancellor Kohl. He has said that on the first day when he is Chancellor, he will travel on the same day to Warsaw and Paris. I think he will be able, and also with his contacts, both to Macron and especially to Donald Tusk, that he will come back to that leading figuration. It was in the past Paris and Berlin, and it's now Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw.
Were you surprised in his first statement that he was so definitive about Europe needing to be independent of the United States, almost emphasizing the breach rather than trying to paper it over?
I think it's very clear after Munich and J.D. Vance's speech. It became very clear that we're on a way that Washington, Peking, and Moscow agree in one point: destroy Europe as a unity. Because they all see the European Union as a unity, as a competitor. In the past, it was Europe and the United States together, in American opinion. This has changed. And he understands that Germany alone is too small to defend herself. And here I think he sees that our chance to go forward in a way of sovereign autonomy. It's an important question.
What do you think he's going to be able to achieve in terms of shoring up Europe's defences?
The member countries of the European Union spend per year around 350 billion euros for defense, with a ridiculous low result because of the lack of standardization, of common procurement. It's a cooperation standardization on the European level to come to bigger production figures and so on. 3 or 5% means export increase for the United States to Europe, but not European strengths. And because there is now, with Trump, not the credibility that we can trust the United States, we have to do it our own.
Will Donald Trump pummel the EU with trade tariffs on goods and other issues, essentially to crowbar its way into the big digital market that the EU represents for technology.
This is an anti-democratic pressure. It's anti-democratic in the United States at the moment also. And to give the power in the world or in a country to a few businessmen, which are not controllable anymore, would be the end of a free world. That is Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. And when I see now that Mr. Trump says Zelensky is a dictator and he is responsible for the war, Aldous Huxley would not have thought about such a new speech as it's used at the moment. And if we do not counteract that, then there will be a problem.
You could see what's happening in America as a blip. You know, there'll be midterms in 20 months or something. The normal cycle is that things will change, the Democrats will recover, and that this Trump policy may be a blip. But you're not seeing it as a blip, I think.
In politics, you have always to look into the worst possibility and prepare for that. If we could come a change of the American policy again, we would be very happy. But nevertheless, it's wise that Europeans become stronger. It would be right without Trump, but with Trump, it's especially right. If we do not do that, we are lost. We have no alternative. We have in Europe now, because of Trump and Putin and Xi, a final chance. Europe came back after the First World War, came back as Europe after the Second World War. The third time would not happen. We have to see it in this historic dimension. And therefore I believe that we will be able to achieve that in Europe, in the European Union, and as my feeling, as my context to the United Kingdom show, that Keir Starmer has that understood too. And therefore, this is the most decisive moment since 80 years.
That was Elmar Brok, one of the longest-serving German politicians from the Christian Democratic Union, who has been to every congress of theirs since 1970. I suppose the question I have in my mind is, look, the CDU, the Christian Democrats of Germany, now actually have three of the biggest positions inside the European Union, so they really do have an opportunity to effect change. Ursula von der Leyen is at the helm of the European Commission. She's a CDU politician. And over at the European Parliament, which ratifies the laws that the Commission puts forward, there's another German Conservative running the biggest bloc there, Manfred Weber from the Bavarian sister party, the CSU. So they have all the levers of power, but I suppose it depends on whether or not Friedrich Merz is going to be able to get his agenda through domestically in Germany, because that was one of the problems that Olaf Scholz had. It seems as though the parliamentary arithmetic is favourable in his on his side, Friedrich Merz, because he'll be able to cobble together a coalition, it looks like, with the SPD. But they may not be in agreement with all of his plans, especially on highly contentious issues like migration.
No, so it's a really good point that the CDU is in a very, very strong position. I hadn't really thought of it like that, but it certainly is. And I mean, it's just worth making the point, which I think is reflected in what Merz has said in his after the election. I mean, I was in a pub in London last night with, liberal journalists, and they were all saying, look, this is an opportunity for Europe. If the Americans are going to break away like this, then at last Europe's free to criticise America. It's free to assert its own values. It's free to make points of difference with the United States, which there are many, and which tend to be glossed over a bit, as a result of the Cold War and the subsequent politics of international politics. And maybe now, this is a moment when Europe can actually go deeper, go not wider but deeper, and establish itself as the economic powerhouse that, as Elmar Brok says, it already is. Now, let's just put this in some context, and I'm very, very interested in what you think about this, because, we've got this election result now. The AFD, the far-right party, got 20%. This is a party, some of whose leaders have used Nazi slogans. They've been convicted of using them, and then they've used them again. There are many echoes of the Nazi past in some of the rhetoric from some of the AFD people, and despite all that, they're getting 20%. And of course, that's part of a European phenomenon. And it does raise the question that amidst all this talk of deepening Europe, there are many who are saying, no, we want to split Europe into nations again, Yes, you can cooperate economically, but no shared or much less shared sovereignty. And I guess the big picture is that the European Union, as Elmar Brok said, was created to defend Europe from fascism, from a return to what happened in the Second World War. And it has delivered peace and prosperity, but clearly there is this question mark now. Are we at a moment again that we are at the beginning of a very right-wing, far-right age that will take us back to the days of the 1930s in Munich when Adolf Hitler was rising to power?
Before Hitler, Germany had been deep in economic depression. Before Hitler, unemployment had stood at 7 million. Before Hitler, Germany was a democracy, but too many parties had split the vote, so governments were weak and unable to solve the crisis. Hitler offered dictatorship, all power in the hands of one man. And Germany was quick to accept Hitler's terms.
These, of course, are the shrill tones of Adolf Hitler, the leader Germans are most ashamed of, a man who murdered millions of people and unleashed the chaos of the Second World War. You know, Owen, I first learned German at 12 years old, and I got some time to do exchanges in the Black Forest, in German schools, and even then I became conscious of what's called die Vergangenheitsbewältigung. This is a term used to describe the shame that Germany has in confronting its past in the Second World War. Because of this, in Germany, broadcasting a clip like that would actually be taboo for some people, but we've done so to try and illustrate just how Hitler got started. And essentially, he did that by leveraging discontent over a moribund economy. That speech that you just heard there actually wasn't during World War II. It was about 3 years before. And the point that he was making in that clip in German is essentially that Germans weren't getting properly rewarded for their work, that life wasn't getting better for them. And somehow he was saying, quote unquote, others are benefiting from the finite resources that Germany had during that interwar period. The reason I mention this is because these are arguments you're hearing yet again being resurfaced, including in German politics today, espoused by people like, for instance, the far-right AFD-or Alternative für Deutschland party.
Well, as you know, I've been in Munich recently and really exploring those sort of questions and just trying to understand what is the importance of the moment we're in. I mean, I think we can all agree it's a massive moment, but how should we interpret it? Is this liberal hysteria, or is it something that's a real threat? I spoke to a newspaper editor there. It's Platow. It's a business newspaper, and Justus Schirmacher is very plugged into the business community. You know, there's a lot of conservative politics in Munich. He's across all of that, understands what's going on in the city, what people think, how they are judging this moment, how they're assessing what's happening in Germany.
The last few years have brought a massive transformation on a number of political questions where Germany had to travel particularly far. If you think of migration, where we came from in 2015, we definitely traveled the longest distance, I think. On defense, I mean, I have to be perfectly honest, 7 years ago, if you'd asked me if I wanted to increase in defense spending, I would have 100% said no, rather increase the education budget. And that was naive of me. And I think probably there were many people in Germany thinking that. And then also on the relationship with Russia, I think Germany, and I think here of a conversation I remember very clearly my dad had with an Englishman 7 years ago, where he staunchly defended our close ties to Russia and explaining it with our understanding of Russia. And so I think there as well, we just had to travel a very long distance in a very short period of time. So that is very difficult for the establishment.
And when you talk to business leaders, as you do in this country, are they concerned that the rise of the populist right does mean that the European Union is seriously challenged now? You know, Brexit was one thing, but that it's going further than that now, and that there are challenges to Europe?
To be perfectly honest, I don't see it front and center currently in the debate, because Germany is preoccupied with itself right now. And that's what I hear when you go to other countries and also to the States. People are saying, what's going on there? You know, nothing is moving because you are holding up everything because you're occupied with yourself.
But Germany is not leading in Europe like it used to.
Yes. I think that's true. Yeah.
But overall, you're giving me the impression that the AFD, it's a significant new development, but you're not that concerned about it.
No, I am concerned about it. And I think the biggest risk right now is not from the AFD, but rather from the democratic establishment, that they can show that they can find solutions and implement them to the pretty difficult problems they're confronted with. So I think it is serious, but it's not 1930s Germany.
And there we are. That was Justus Schirmacher editing that business newspaper and having some insights as he sees it into what's going on. Not panicking, but nonetheless saying there are these big issues. And I guess the issue that matters perhaps most is, we've talked about the economy. I mean, the other big issue is migration, and the European Union have come up with this pact on migration, which, frankly, having looked at it, doesn't seem to be a game changer. It's talking about sharing the burden more equally and speeding up asylum processes and so on. And as we look ahead on migration, the UK tried this Rwanda plan, which was rejected by the current Labour government, immediately dropped. Other European countries are now talking about offshore processing of refugees in Albania and elsewhere. And I just wonder whether, given the strength of public feeling on migration, whether anything short of that offshore processing will be enough to dent the support of the far-right parties. And, we're seeing centre-right parties moving further and further on this issue of migration towards the far-right positions. And they're doing it because they feel the pressure from the voters.
And Merz himself, Owen, let's face it, is a classic example of that, because in the run-up to this election, he engaged in a gamble that backfired in spectacular fashion. He wanted to try and push through a tougher immigration bill through Parliament, but to do so, he had to rely upon votes coming from that far-right AFD party. And ultimately, even if they might have voted with him, it wasn't enough to carry the motion. He was much criticised by his predecessor, Angela Merkel, for forevermore having weakened that sacrosanct firewall between centrist and radical parties. Now, a surefire way of distracting a discontented electorate is to try and stimulate the economy as soon as possible. How exactly could Friedrich Merz do that for Germany and for Europe as a whole? Well, we have an inkling of what he might prioritise, and I heard it firsthand when the European People's Party, which brings together Conservatives across more than 80 parties around the European Union, asked me to moderate their annual Congress in Romania last year. And this is what Friedrich Merz said in his speech there.
I would like to make it very clear. The competitiveness of our industry, the creation of jobs and affordable energy, these are the missions we must focus on now.
So, Owen, listen to that. We're not just back to the good old days of the stable grand coalitions between the CDU and the Social Democrats in Germany. We're also back to the days of the 1990s when Bill Clinton's strategist famously devised that quip, "It's the economy, stupid." That appears to be the message here coming from Friedrich Merz. Slight issue with that plan is the fact that, as per the last government, there is the legacy of a debt brake that prevents the German government from borrowing more to invest when industry needs a little bit of extra help. And so he's probably going to have to come up with some private capital solution. Either way, though, it does sound like he has a plan for this new next few years in government, if his government can stay the course.
So there we are. We thought we would do this edition, which we perhaps should have said at the beginning. We thought we should do this edition because the German election is so important. What happened in the Munich Security Conference with Vance was so important. What's being the yawning, huge division that's arisen in a matter of days between the United States and Europe, overturning so many decades of settled policy, just seems so important. And we're hoping to come back with a second series very soon, at which point we will be covering what's going on in this whole world of the challenge to democratic values week by week. But for this edition, that's it. So from Owen, Bennett-Jones here in London, goodbye. And
from Nina Dos Santos here in London, goodbye. Just a quick reminder that this show, Control Alt Deceit, is brought to you in association with Democratis, which is a charitable organisation that is set up to shed light upon how our democracy works and also how best it can be protected. Well, you can find us on various social media channels. Our X handle is @CTRL_danger, and we're also on YouTube. at Defend Democratis, and we're on Blue Sky as well. See you soon. Goodbye.